So with the recent announcement of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 being officially delayed to spring of 2023, there has been a ton of speculation and discussion online around what this means for Nintendo going forward, whether or not there's a big system plan to launch alongside of something like the Breath of the Wild sequel, and also what they might do now to fill the gap that Breath of the Wild 2 will ultimately leave in their 2022 lineup. And in today's video, I want to round up all of the different opinions and theories out there and share my own take on what I truly think we will see Nintendo do for the rest of 2022, and even talk about new hardware in 2023. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below. Hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. Now, as I mentioned, guys, we got a major discussion to unpack today, as clearly we saw just this last week some major news announced from Nintendo, where they did confirm that, of course, Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, instead of being released in 2022 like we thought it would be up to that point in time, that they need additional development time with this game, and it is now a spring of 2023 release. And of course, that sent the internet ablaze with various different theories on what the reasoning is behind this. Is it really just more time for the game? I would tend to say yes, but you also have a lot of people now speculating that maybe if there is some kind of Switch revision or 4K DLSS style Switch around the corner, that we clearly know Nintendo's working on that, right? Like, we can all agree on that. There's been a data mine already that shows that there is a new version of an NVIDIA chipset that would support DLSS technology, and it was spotted during a very unfortunate cyber attack that did happen to NVIDIA themselves. And this is a real project. And of course, Nintendo, after 5 full years of selling the Switch on the market and fastly approaching the 6th year, like, yes, they're going to be working on new hardware behind the scenes in some way, shape, or form. In terms of the timeline of releasing the new hardware, that's where the debate and speculation comes in. But you do have to argue that if there ever was a game to launch alongside of a new Switch revision, and I still think that if let's just go out on a limb and say we do get something in terms of new Switch hardware that launches alongside of Breath of the Wild 2, I think it's early to be a true next-gen successor to the Switch, and I think it's more likely to be something that is fully compatible with all of the current library of Switch games, but can give that 4K upscale docked performance with just much better looking visuals. Maybe there's some certain titles that will ultimately be locked to only that new version of the Switch, similar to how we saw them do certain titles that could only run on the new 3DS. Granted, there was very few of those. It could be a situation like that. It definitely could be something like a Switch 2 or a true up next gen successor, but I do think that even if you look at Nintendo president's comments, Shintaro Furukawa himself, that they feel like they need to have some kind of new concept or new idea to create a new experience to really launch a new generation of hardware. And even in their most recent investor meetings, they are still claiming the Nintendo Switch family of consoles is in the halfway point of its life cycle in their eyes. And they've also been documented saying that due to the unprecedented success of the Switch, that the life cycle is tending to change over time in their eyes because it continues to sell so well. And obviously they want to capitalize on momentum when they have it and not pull the plug on something too early. That is why we are still seeing DLC for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in today's day and age, because that game never stops selling. So why do you need to release a Mario Kart 10 or Crossroads or whatever it will be called? That is Nintendo's mindset with the Switch, in my opinion. So while I don't necessarily think the Breath of the Wild 2 delay is directly tied to new hardware, it's just a likely possibility, as you know what happened in 2017 when Breath of the Wild was a cross-generational title. It launched on the Wii U and the Switch on the same day, and of course it helped propel the sales of the Switch, as it was the reason to go get the new Nintendo console and check out the new mainline Zelda game. Of course, they could have the same effect even if it's just a revision, as I do think a lot of the camp that has the base model Switch would probably hop on board and actually upgrade this time around, even if they didn't, to the OLED model, if it is a true performance increase with better frame rates, better textures, and ultimately just a higher resolution, especially in docked mode. And I think that's a totally plausible strategy on Nintendo's part to release it alongside of the sequel to Breath of the Wild. So can that happen? Yes. Obviously, we don't have any concrete timeline on when Nintendo is planning their next announcement, and we really most likely will not know until they announce it themselves with something like a surprise trailer drop one day, just like they did with the OLED model. And then if it lines up with the launch date of Breath of the Wild 2, well, then at that point, we can look back and say, yeah, maybe Breath of the Wild 2 needed a little bit extra development time, but Nintendo was definitely planning this as a coinciding launch, as they've done in the past as well. Not to mention, I think Legend of Zelda games are one of the few titles that ever get that cross-generational treatment on their launch day at least, and are sometimes even held back to launch on new hardware, as we did see that same thing happen on the Wii with Twilight Princess, because that game was being developed for the GameCube towards the end of its life cycle, and we actually saw the game held back to help launch the Wii, and they actually had to do an entire mirror mode of the game for the Wii and program in motion controls, which caused basically an extra year of development, but they wanted that game to help push the new hardware. And of course, that did work out very well for them. And then most recently with Breath of the Wild, we saw it again. So it's not uncommon for Nintendo to really want Zelda to be a system seller when it launches on new hardware. And we've seen them hold back the game before to make sure that that happens. So I do want to know from you guys on this particular part of the topic today in the comments down below how you think we will see this play out. Do you think Nintendo is planning something like more powerful hardware and it will launch alongside Breath of the Wild 2? Or is the delay just simply tied to the game's development only and Nintendo is not planning any kind of hardware revision anytime soon? And if you do think that, when do you think we see it? Is it something like 2024 instead? Maybe even 2025? I definitely want to hear from you on that portion of the topic. And then the part 2 of the topic we have to cover today is what this delay really means for the rest of 2022's lineup, as of course it is already stacked with numerous releases. We are right around the corner from Nintendo Switch Sports launching in late April. Then in June, of course, we have the Mario Strikers Battle League game, which I am personally very pumped for. Over the summer window, we already know to expect Splatoon 3, Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, and then in September we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3. November is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and that's not to mention all of the third-party games that we know are coming as well, like Sonic Frontiers in late 2022, Bayonetta 3, and Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope. Like, there is a ton of Nintendo Switch titles that will be quality and that will sell the system, so you can say that Nintendo can just simply stop there and not release any other major games. But if I'm a betting man, I think Nintendo has a few more aces up their sleeves, and I'm super hopeful that even though E3 has officially been canceled, even in their digital form, and we covered that in a previous video in case you guys haven't seen it, but E3 is not happening this year. I do not personally think that that means Nintendo is not holding a direct over the summertime. I hope it is in June, and it would be alongside where the E3 schedule would have happened anyway. That remains to be seen. It may be a June direct, it may be a July or even August direct, but I do think that we for sure see it happen in the summertime, and it really needs to be earlier, because you know that the September direct is pretty rock solid every year, and we can always expect a Nintendo direct pretty much every September without fail. So of course we have to expect it to be in the beginning part of the summer if it happens at all, and I'm hopeful it will. Well, will it all be games that are already announced? No, of course there will be some updates on games we know to expect, but I do think that this is the window where they drop a couple big bombshells, and I think the most likely scenario is some of these long rumored titles that we've been talking about and reporting upon on the channel, as numerous gaming journalists have claimed. Titles like Metroid Prime 1 Remake. I think this is very likely, and I think that this is something we can absolutely expect to be added into the 2022 lineup for Nintendo Switch, as it is the 20th anniversary for Metroid Prime, and we know that Retro is most likely not going to be in a position to fully pull back the curtains on Metroid Prime 4. Hopefully we get a glimpse of gameplay and what the world and the graphics look like, but I think the more likely scenario is, at least maybe if we do get some kind of trailer, thank you for your patience with Metroid Prime 4. We still need more development time with this game, and while you guys are waiting, here is Metroid Prime 1 Remake. I think that game sells very well. I think it exposes a whole new generation of fans to this game that need to see it, because as I mentioned, it's 20 years ago since Metroid Prime 1 originally came out, which is crazy to think, but that is the world we are living in, and a lot of people don't know what the Prime version of Metroid games really have to offer, because while in its core it is similar to a Dread experience, it's also very different in the 3D world, and even though there's similar exploration and weapon upgrades and things that happen along the way, it is a very different overall gameplay feel from start to finish. And I think that if we're talking about the 4th installment in this franchise, we have to ultimately play through 1, 2, and 3, and I can see them slowly trickling those out as we build up to the launch of Metroid Prime 4, which may be a 2024 or maybe best case scenario a late 2023 title at this point in time. The next game I think is highly likely to slot into the 2022 lineup and be revealed at something like a summertime Nintendo Direct is that heavily rumored Donkey Kong game, as we know that they are working on something with Donkey Kong. It's been traced back to the same studio that actually works on Mario Odyssey, and while I think Mario Odyssey 2 is also maybe in the possibility of conversation, I think it's way less likely than a Donkey Kong game. It has been quite some time since Tropical Freeze was ported over from the Wii U to the Switch, and keep in mind that's not an original Donkey Kong game, that's just a port. And so I think similar to how we got Kirby and the Forgotten Land announced in the September Direct, then ultimately saw it released in the spring just here recently this last month in March, that Donkey Kong being announced in something like June and then being released later on late fall is totally plausible, and it would be another good holiday system seller to have on the shelves, as I definitely am ready for another Donkey Kong game. I'm sure many other fans out there are, and I just love the 2D platforming, the hardcore platforming that comes along with Donkey Kong style games. And whether or not this goes in a different direction and is actually 3D, even though a lot of people are calling it 2.5D, whatever that ends up being, I am here for it. I've always been a Donkey Kong fan my entire life, especially when it comes to those 2D ones. Most notably Donkey Kong Country 1 through 3 for me on the SNES are super enjoyable, with Donkey Kong Country 2 standing out as maybe my favorite 2D platformer of all time, period. So I definitely think that's another one we have to include in this conversation. Then the last couple, and I don't think we're necessarily getting both. I sure hope we do, but we got to talk about them. Of course, that is the very heavily rumored and long awaited Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD ports to the Nintendo Switch, as these are two Wii U titles that have yet to receive a port. They're part of a very small group that's left behind on the Wii U right now. And when you're talking about mainline 3D Zelda games, you know, even if you just re-release them, they're going to sell incredibly well. And the games never really got that great of a chance to sell on the Wii U to begin with, because of course the install base was about 13 million, whereas we are well over 100 million on the Switch. So of course bring them over, of course re-release them. How Nintendo actually does this is what is the more interesting topic point, because I think we definitely get them at some point. We've had all of the conversation around the gaming journalists reporting on them that they are real projects, and after Andy Robinson originally claimed these games were real and would be coming to the Switch in 2021, and of course that didn't happen, Jeff Grubb then went on to say that he does also believe that Nintendo has these games essentially done and ready to go, and they would potentially be slotted in the event that Breath of the Wild 2 needed more development time. And of course, now that we have that announcement, that opens up the door for that scenario to ultimately play out, because it's not tied to something like The Legend of Zelda 35th Anniversary. Like when we first thought those games would come over, I think it's way more likely to see them released individually rather than a combo pack, meaning maybe we would get Wind Waker HD this year, then Breath of the Wild 2 comes out in 2023, and in 2024 we get something like the Twilight Princess HD ultimately making it over. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and maybe Nintendo's just super generous this time around and gives us two Wii U games full length in one cartridge. But up to this point in time, every way they've brought over a Wii U port has been a full priced standalone release, and I don't see them doing it any differently than that, outside of the exception of something like a 35th anniversary, which clearly that ship has come and gone. So for me personally, I am very hopeful that we get at least one or two brand new game announcements, maybe more than that, maybe less than that, but definitely some big hitters like your Metroids, your Donkey Kongs, and maybe if we're lucky, even a Zelda game. As we know, Nintendo likes to release one per calendar year if you just look at history, and now 2022 has no Zelda games on the table currently. So regardless of how we see them handle all of this, I definitely think 2022 is going to be a great year to be a Switch owner. I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video on all your personal thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today. Do you think we're getting new hardware alongside Breath of the Wild 2? What's the real reason you think for the delay of that game? And definitely let me know if you think Nintendo has some aces up their sleeves when it comes to the rest of 2022's game lineup, or if what you think we have already announced is probably more likely what we will receive this year, and any big titles would be pushed into 2023. So I want to hear from you guys regardless of where you fall on the opinions and the topics we talked about today. Before you leave the video, in the comments down below, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Make sure you check out yesterday's video if you haven't already, where I had some fun with you guys and did an April Fool's video about Microsoft acquiring Nintendo as a whole, and it was a ton of fun for me. I definitely enjoyed seeing your guys' reactions in the comments down below, so make sure you watch that one if you haven't already. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.